first item of business.
Of course.
Thank you so much.
Right. Welcome to a newly formed Finance and Ops Committee. Public questions. Hang on a second, we're not quite public questions yet. First of all, there's fire safety protocol. Door. Got recording protocol. Kept to record it. Does anyone else want to record me today? No. The 7 PM welcome, which is cool. Public questions. Would anyone in the public like to put a question?
Oh, maybe. No, that's good.
Yeah. Excellent. Right. So the first item of business, item 1, is the election of a chair. So that's for anyone, rather than proposing, so anyone want to be the chair of Finance and Ops, particularly.
I mean, I've not mentioned it to her, but if I was nominated anyway, I would nominate Jem. I don't know. I've not spoken to her, so I don't know if it would be something she'd be interested. Purely on the basis that when I look at the people in the room and look at who has that analytical process with documents, so far that seems to be Jem's forte. But that's just.
I would second that.
But it's
Hang on, this all went very quick, didn't it?
Brilliant.
No, the point is, are you happy with that? Would anyone else like to do it?
No, I think you'd be good at it.
I think it's.
It's not for everyone.
I think it's one of those things where setting the agenda is quite important with a committee like this. So I think someone that's going to be able to drill down in the document to make sure that we have the right agendas to work to. But as I say, don't feel that there's a pressure on you to do it. That's just me assessing the, and it's something that we can rotate as we go forward anyway.
Absolutely.
And I think for me, my only issue now is my work time constraints. I've literally come straight from work, so the time to read the documents at the moment I'm going to really struggle with. In 3 or 4 months I probably won't.
Okay.
And it's just that I need it now.
I think we're just about to move into these sort of almost like a summer recess period where things are going to calm down, and of course I guess we're going to touch on it when we move into the actual meeting. The fact that we're struggling with resource anyway to support the committee. So for all those reasons, I think I would imagine the committee's going to be relatively light on its agenda until we get to sort of September, October time. That's just my assessment. But what do you think? Or is there anyone else that wants to?
Well, can you like if you're struggling for the next 4 months, what was it, 8 weeks or something?
Yeah, I'm trying to open a couple of care homes, which are proving quite difficult right now. So my time is very much involved with those. Rightly so, so it's my paid job. But I think there's a lot in finance and ops that needs to be unpicked. And it's about, I guess, the dedication of the committee and that they've been able to do that. And it's not just going to sit with one person to do that.
Well, you can't hope that that burden should necessarily land on the chair specifically.
No.
So, it's really the chair should just.
Yeah, after all, there's no reason why you can't say, well, so-and-so looks after that bit.
I've got great office delegation.
There you are.
Thanks for worrying as well.
I mean, how much, because I don't know how much work that would involve. How many documents? Is it a regular thing, or like Sean said, is it quite quiet until September now?
I think it would need to be quite quiet until September, and then we need to because all the policies need reviewing. All of the finances need reviewing. And that has to happen, but that's not going to happen this month or next month.
I don't know if that's necessarily the job of just the chair, but that's all of us have to do that. So I mean, the big jobs of the chair usually I find is you kind of have to pay a little bit of attention, which is quite hard for other meetings, and you have to sort of do that kind of thing. And of course you've got to make sure that you get the minutes signed and all that sort of stuff. That's administrative stuff, and ideally get to most of the meetings. But and sometimes coordinate the meetings a little bit, but it shouldn't be a huge. It's not like you have to do the whole finance ops yourself as chair. Probably a really good chance to get some practice.
Exactly.
I mean, could Gemma go, this is too much? So, I don't know. just put up with you.
Sounds like deputy chair commitment.
Yeah, feedback, that's not on here.
How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I'm happy to give it a go, but there's going to be not.
You're going to get our full support. You'll get my full support, and we will share the load between us. So, and as I say, I think if we concentrate on not overloading the agenda until we've got the full complement of staff to support it, then I think it should be reasonably easy, plain sailing.
Okay, well done.
So, can we go around there and take
Good idea. If you want to chair from there.
We'll do it from here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're comfortable.
It's
For
all
the
bit
next
too
meeting,
formal,
I'll make
it's
sure
too
everyone
formal,
does
that,
it.
isn't it?
Get the gown.
I'm not wearing the gown. It's off. And I'm not wearing the chains either. No, thank you.
Okay.
Well, that's it. Like straight in. This is going to be like going gently. So apologies for absence. Everyone's here. Declaration of interest. Anyone got any?
Yes, I'll say that when it comes to grants, two of my boys are in the Scouts, although that doesn't prejudice my opinions, but I'll mention it as an interest. That's correct, next week.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Does that mean that Gordon has to vote on that? Or?
No, I think if he's declared his interest and he feels that it doesn't prejudice his decision-making process in that application, that's a personal decision for him to decide. Yeah.
It's non-pecuniary.
Yeah, exactly. No, I don't think any of us would question it. So.
Okay, terms of reference. Attached. Any questions?
The terms of reference.
Yeah. So draft terms of reference attached to the agenda.
Only one thing, I don't know if it's best to discuss it now or not, but it has been mentioned by other councillors that perhaps the budget, the delegated budget responsibility we have for this committee is too high.
Yeah, that's what I've noticed.
So we have an option to amend that quite simply now, if we wanted to.
I think there's a couple of points, because 1.5 is that we can do £15,000. Then 1.8 is that we can award contract work up to the value of 24,999, and that we can then approve grants up to 15,000. They just seem really high limits.
Yeah. It does for such a small body.
I mean, we could essentially approve over £30,000, £60,000 before we even got to full council meeting.
The only thing I might say is, to be fair, assuming we're all sensible about it, if it is it gives us that flexibility to do things that need to be done, but if it is a kind of contentious issue, that's the sort of thing we should probably maybe push back to full council anyway. So we could do something in emergency, because we've got that power, but that's something we should just...
Did it happen that way so things could act more quickly? Because it seems like a good thing to have that. And we've got quite a lot of councillors on here now. I don't know, because I don't know the limitations of having that, but it seems like if it can be used in the right way, that's a good thing.
Exactly. And this is the trouble with rules, isn't it? They're there to make sure that you can't make... I mean, I think this is really a decision for full council, not for us to decide ourselves what spending limit we should agree up for 6. I think this is something that has to go back to full council for those particular points on how much our spending limit should be. I think that should be a decision for all 11 councillors.
Do we make a proposal? We agree as the finance committee
put that on the agenda for the next meeting.
Yeah, we would just adopt our terms of reference and put that on the next agenda for review.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'd definitely, if we're going to do that, I think we would have to put forward a proposal of what the limits should be, or whether we should even have that ability. I mean, probably having some scope to be able to make financial decisions is part and parcel of being a finance and ops. But what those perhaps we need to put forward a proposal of what we think those limits should be.
So then what, 1.5, 1.8?
And 1.16.
I think you'll find that.
1.9 as well, is that?
I think with 1.16, I think we might, because that might actually then, I'm not sure if that's in conflict with our grant policy anyway.
Yeah.
Because our grant policy says small grants usually for less than £500, and in revenue grants can be awarded up to 3 years with a maximum amount of £3,000 per application. And then community project grants, maximum grants can be 5,000 or up to 50% of the project cost, whichever is the lower. So I'm not sure in what scenario we would be looking at a grant of 15,000.
Surely it just makes sense that we propose that we bring that in line with our grant policy.
Is that a collective amount of grants then?
Well, this, well, I mean, I'm sure it's something we'll just end up discussing later on anyway. And it's something that perhaps we need to, when we get to the section of grants, we need to start looking at our grant policy, because if we've got a budget, an annual budget at the moment of 19,000 to spend on grants, and applications could be up to £5,000 per grant, you can see where we're going to run out of money very quickly. If we approve 3 grants for £5,000, we're pretty much out of business on grants.
But there are grants we award in other ways, aren't there?
Yes.
Like
Yeah, but it's a which budgets.
yeah. Well, that's through that, though, isn't it? We award, there's a Summer Valley FM.
Well, that comes under the revenue grants, where they've been awarded a £3,000 per year grant, but for over 3 years.
That's not through the grant fund.
Yeah.
Yeah. About 19,000.
Yeah, that's with the revenue grants.
But then another one is probably like the community trust, because that's like a really big grant. I don't know if that has to be approved by this committee.
Well,
because that's like what, 29,000.
So
who
No, that
who
should be.
does that? The community trust runs that.
That's a huge amount.
Yeah, no, that should be full council those decisions, yeah. But that's why I wonder whether the 8,000, is it the carnival, the grants like that? I mean, that happens now. Does it happen annually, or do they apply every single year? But that's a large amount, isn't it? That doesn't come through the grant, the £90,000 grant.
I think it does.
No, it doesn't. No, it's itemised separately.
Oh, right.
I think the policy makes sense, doesn't it? It's inversely structured, it gives us figures.
I think at some point, I mean, maybe this is something to put on another agenda.
Yeah, no, I think
whether it's at this meeting or whether it's a full council, we need to review this policy, this grant policy, because, as I say, we've got a problem either way. We've either got too small a budget or too larger amounts that people can bid for within the grants. So something has to change, but we've got to bring the amounts they can bid for down or increase that budget to be able to, I'm not saying that everyone that comes in and applies for 5,000, but certainly we're looking at bids of that magnitude in today's applications. So for a further date, obviously that's another document that probably needs some review. But in terms of where we are now, in terms of deciding what we would propose to put as a cap on what we can spend without going back to full council, I don't know.
Well, if we were to say like 1.5, and we could authorise the income up to say 10,000.
I know, but we're quite tight on money, aren't we? We do need to have better control on it.
I guess you don't have to award the grant though either.
No,
or do you have to?
That's expenditure, not
Income and
grant.
expenditure.
Yeah.
Well, it seems maybe then there's 2 ways of doing this. If we're going to take it to full council and ask them to review this policy on how much we're allowed to spend, we can either we put it to full council with some recommendations, or we put it back to full council and allow a debate to happen and see where the debate ends up. I don't know.
Yeah, but that could take half an hour, couldn't it?
Like, yeah.
I mean, we're here now. We're
Yeah.
the finance.
Okay.
So why don't we decide what we would suggest and put that forward to the council, and then they can say yea or nay, can't they?
Okay. Okay. So 1.5 to authorise all income and expenditure and all payments up to £15,000 in line with the financial regulations. So we're not just talking about grants there.
No, that's not grants. No.
No.
That's paying the bills.
Mm.
Do we have bills of £10,000 ordinarily?
Well, the architect monthly is that, isn't it?
Yes, I mean it's going to be. So
Otherwise we'll all be meeting.
yeah, we'll be constantly meeting to.
It seems like a safe enough amount of people to not, do something else.
Yeah, and I don't think any of us are daft enough to say, oh, spend it. They're my friends, that sort of thing.
We have quite a couple already, and someone has agreed on that, so
Well, we do
come
have
on,
this,
somewhere do it.
we do have this issue that the quorum for this committee, I think it's only 3 people,
Yeah.
which is a very small number of people to make a potentially large decision, which I think is possibly a risk.
Yeah, so 5 members and 3 to be quorum.
We can't change that, so.
Can we not change that under the...
No, isn't that the core thing?
Can we change that? Can we increase it rather than decrease it?
The legal standing is that it's further membership, so you do only need 4 at council. It's not massively more than 3. I just to the reason you've got 24,999 there is because contracts finder is in place and everything. Every contract over 25,000 is has to be published on the government contracts finder website. Everything under it is covered by your financial regulations. So I don't think there's a big issue with that. Your £15,000 for the grant is probably based on the fact that you have 2 grants that you give each year. One to the Community Trust Committee, which is 15,000, and the other one is to the Town Trust, which is 15,000. So I suspect that's where that's come from. Christmas lights isn't really a grant, so I don't know why it's under grants, unless there's a Christmas lights committee I don't know how your Christmas lights work here, so I'm not sure that that's a grant. So those are the reasons for that. If you get full body of staff, the combined cost of your staff, including all the pensions, contributions and all the rest, is going to be more than 50 or around about £15,000. So you need that in place. So they are practical limits. I haven't changed anything on these because they what were in place before. So I think I don't think there's anything untoward. What you can't do, because your financial regulations don't allow it, is to spend more than the balance of the budget. Because essentially, when you agree your budget, what you're doing is you're agreeing payment of those sums. That's the theory behind it. So you're actually, and the budget can only be adopted by full council, and precept can only be set by full council. That's the law. There's only precept, not so much budget.
So if we need to have 15,000 in order to approve staff wages, that makes sense because we don't have to at full council. But why can't we then break that down so we can authorise expenditure staff wages up to 15,000, but all other income and expenditure up to a limit of X amount.
It would. So you've got to. I mean, even now with the 15,000 limit, you couldn't sign off the town hall project because it's £50,000. I mean, last month it was £100,000. So you couldn't sign that payment off, even though the majority of that money is coming back in the grant fund. So the question is, why are you having a committee? Are you having a committee to take some pressure off the council and provide a forum in which to discuss openly and fully things like the budget, things like expenditure, things like setting precept, or are you going to double up your decisions? So you have to have a council meeting anyway to ratify what the committee's putting forward. In which case, the question of why you're having a committee is begins to blur, really. So, I mean, I don't know. It's entirely up to you, but these do need to be approved by full council. They're not any different from the terms of reference that were set. I mean, I would have more issue with the professional advice, the feasibility studies, the assist in preparing project briefs, and so on. Seek grant aid and all of those, because they're poorly worded. Point of architecture, an architect, they're all poorly worded, so they really need to be, those are the ones that I would suggest you need to review.
So on this one, then maybe the best approach for this, taking on board what Paul said there, is for us to go with the terms of reference as they are, but take that to full council, explain our discussion, and ask full council to come to the same conclusion, then, which we stick with the terms of reference for now.
I don't think that prevents us from looking at these at a future date.
No, I think we're all responsible people. I think if that's the way we go, then we just at least need to make sure that everyone on the council understands what terms of reference we're working to, and if they've got any concern about them.
Yes.
And I think that's what we've done for all other references and policies, is that we've kind of agreed them as they are now, with a view to update and amend them.
Well, especially with new staff arriving that can advise us, and they'll scrutinise the finances as well and go, why is this agreed like this? And as Paul says, there's other things later that are probably more wood. So it's a big job to address it. So yeah, I would propose we accept it.
Yeah. Agree? No previous minutes, and we've got the monthly report for May. Any questions, comments?
Not really. Only issues, concerns about the grants and the grant systems, but I don't know if that comes into this discussion or the next one, really. Just trying to understand financially where we are with.
So with the grant, from the information that Martin sent, there was a 19,000 budget and 11,622 has been awarded. So we've got 7,378 left for the rest of the year.
Right.
Does it go from January to December, or is it financial year? Financial year.
Yeah, unfortunately, because I did look up last year's, there was a big expenditure last year, so unfortunately the council overspent its budget last year, but it was there was a Jubilee thing, so that came out of the. So what I was thinking is that maybe you could sort of draw some from last year's balances. And you did underspend on the grant thing, but overall But
I don't know if that's true. I mean, I make last year's grant figure just over 19,000 in total, which, and this is why I mentioned it, because I've got a problem with trying to work out where we've got to. I mean, the preset leaflet shows a spend of 15,000, but there's a lot of grey areas in terms of, you know, because we were talking when the council met and decided to award 3,000 to the Outfield Festival and 1,000 to the parks. It was on the basis that there was still space available with the current grant of last year, but there wasn't. So it looks like that's been pushed into this year.
That will come out of the grant.
I can't remember that. I thought it was Jubilee money.
So you've got things like the coronation booklet that was in last year, which has now found its way into this year's budget rather than last year's. That was agreed on last year's budget. The Outfield Festival grant 3,000 was agreed on last year's budget, and the parks, what was it called? There was a play park, play area, the Bath play area, £1,000. All of those were agreed in last year's budget, but for some reason they're now in this year's budget, which means that your 15,000 from last year was actually 19,000. So to make it 15,000, it looks like that all of those have been pushed into the new financial year, which have been eaten away at this year's £19,000 budget. On top of those grants given to the radio station, where there's 2 grants of 3,000 that have overlapped for some reason, and the 3-year grant for the market. So suddenly you've got nothing. It's been drastically overspent last year, which has taken away all of last year's budget and most of this year's budget in one go.